From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano and John Meoli live on a Wednesday in September, a rainy Wednesday in September. We are going to be discussing the job that Tony Mansolino has done with these Baltimore Orioles as we close in on the end of the Orioles 2025 season. We're going to talk about the fact that Trevor Rogers is your MVO, one Most Valuable Oriole. We'll, of course, do our minor league check-in, talk about some Orioles in the Arizona Fall League. But first, John, we got to start with a review, because if you write us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, I will read it out here on the show. We got one recently. Boosted our ratings up to 4.7.
That's good.
That means some people, are giving us less than 5 stars. I don't read those reviews.
I think they were from
I don't read.
I bet we have
feedback.
5 stars for this era.
Wow.
Is what I'll say.
Okay.
Is what I'll say.
For this
Not
era,
that I've ever looked.
For the John Meoli, Paul Mancano version, which pre-John Meoli version of the Banner Baseball Show, it was a rotating cast of characters that would be co-hosting with me.
Yeah, and if any of those characters think I'm burying them, I absolutely am. Absolutely am. No, we're having a lot of fun here, Paul. Let's hear this good review.
Yeah, let's hear from Sean_Aru, who says, love listening to Paul and John every week. The depth of insight they bring into the org system and players really has you feeling like you've got a pulse on the team week in and year out. They've invested in the metrics that explain the game, and while still leaving plenty of room for the feelings and emotions that connect to everyday fans of the team. Would recommend the Banner Baseball Show to anyone and everyone. Wow, recommend this to...
That's so kind. Thank you.
I don't know if I'd recommend this show to everybody. I can certainly think of some non-baseball fans or non-Orioles fans who wouldn't enjoy it, but maybe they would. You never know.
I think everyone should give it a try.
That's all right.
I think everybody should.
Just like the Fast and Furious movies.
Yeah.
I spent last night watching some Mission Impossible movies.
Okay.
By the way, I know that's a favorite of Kyle Goon, columnist. Good, solid films. I don't know how they'll stack up with Fast and Furious.
I'm not as steeped in those as I am in Fast and Furious.
In the FF. Okay, well, we'll compare and contrast. All right, John, we are very, very close to the end of the 2025 season.
So close. How does that sit with you?
Well, it started, considering this season got off the rails pretty much immediately. I mean, they split a series in Toronto, and then by the end of April, you're not feeling great. By the end of May, you're feeling like the season is down the toilet. By the end of July, it's a completely different team than the one that they started with. And right now, it just is a slow kind of death march to the end of the season.
Yeah.
So it really feels like 4 seasons in one. It feels like the good part of the season we never really got to experience it. So I don't know. I feel like I'm ready. I think a lot of Orioles fans are ready to turn the page and look forward to the offseason.
Yeah. I asked you because somebody asked me yesterday. They were like, this must have been this must be tough, the season ending. And it's like, no, it was tough when the season began and was going the way that it was.
Yes.
Like, that was really, really, really unpleasant.
Yeah.
For so many reasons, none of which we need to rehash.
No.
For the 17th time.
We'll rehash it.
Yeah.
I was yesterday, I'm trying to compile my notes for the offseason. I was going through the trades that happened at the deadline where they sent out 9 players and got 16 back. And it's just so much to wrap your mind around. And we're going to spend a lot of October, I think, picking up the pieces of this season and looking back at what was this season. But I think at this point last year, the Orioles obviously were kind of careening towards another playoff disappointment, another playoff sweep. But it was much more fun, obviously, at this point last year. And 2 years ago, you didn't want the season to end. This is a different set of circumstances. The Orioles are eliminated. They're out of it. There's really not much reason to watch other than Adley Rutschman is back and Trevor Rogers maybe gets one more start.
Yeah.
That's roughly it. Speaking of Trevor Rogers, how about the fact that a guy who came over in what many Orioles fans dubbed the worst trade in Orioles history a year ago has won Most Valuable Oriole. And John, I think you deserve a lot of credit for this, because even before the Orioles traded for Trevor Rogers at the 2024 deadline, you predicted that the Orioles would make this move. You didn't predict the players that they would send out in order to get him from the Miami Marlins, which were Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers. But you did predict that the Orioles would be enticed by a lefty of Trevor Rogers' talent and skill level. They acquire him. He has 3 or 4 very, very poor starts in Baltimore in 2024, gets optioned to AAA Norfolk, struggles there, starts the 2025 season hurt, comes back when this Orioles team is careening towards their horrible, I'm going to use careen a lot because I'm thinking Fast and Furious.
There you go.
Careening towards their disappointing season and a poor finish in the AL East. And he just has a phenomenal year, a year that nobody saw coming, a year that even if you give members of the front office who were probably pounding the table to trade for him last year truth serum, I don't think they could have possibly predicted. A 1.35 ERA in 17 starts, over 100 innings pitched, among the MLB starters with at least 100 innings thrown this year. Rogers is first in ERA, opponent batting average, hits allowed per 9, home runs allowed per 9, base runners allowed per 9, and he's second in WHIP. John, could you ever have seen this season coming from Trevor Rogers?
No, honestly, no. I was trying to, as you were talking about him, go back and see what I actually said about Trevor Rogers in that illustrious trade deadline prediction thing that we got to do last year. Truthfully, no. I think as we were talking over the off season, I was getting mixed messages on Trevor Rogers. There was the I don't know. There's a lot of work left to do camp. Like it's possible, but there's a lot to do. And then there was the like, he's broken, he's cooked. Like, I don't really know what we were doing camp. And at that point, both of those things were true, because if you have that much work, and it's been written about extensively by us, by Jacob and Son did a great story about it. Driveline themselves did a really good story about all the work he had to do. There was a lot that went into Trevor Rogers becoming the player that he is right now. And because of that, you could say he was pretty much like basically cooked. He was toast at that point. You can eat toast if you want to. You can make it better. You can make a sandwich out of it. It's not a terrible sandwich sometimes, but like this has surpassed all those expectations. And I think that
he's a full-on sandwich. He is toast.
The best BLT on toast you've ever had in your entire life. Yeah, this is where we're at. Like end of season, calling Trevor Rogers like a nice lunch. I think it's awesome that he did this, and I wanted to make sure that I got a chance to write about him last week. For his last home start, presumably. I don't think he's starting again this homestand. I haven't been locked in on the probables, but
I would assume he gets one more start.
Yeah, he'll still start in New York for sure, but he had to work really hard to do this. And like, if he had wanted to just be like, I've done this before, this has all worked out, I think this is the right way to go about it, I'm not going to do anything different, we would not be having this conversation right now. And I think there's a pretty interesting parallel for the Orioles, who probably could use to take that look in the mirror and reflect the way Trevor Rogers did and see what they need to do to get better.
Yeah, it's hard for a guy who has been an all-star before to change the way that he does everything. Yeah. To understand that he needs to work on the things that he needs to work on. Honestly, I think we saw it from Charlie Morton, who was 41 years old, who went back into the lab and worked on some stuff and went from a guy who was signed to a $15 million contract to be a starter to out of the rotation, worked on some things and got back into the rotation.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
DFA'd by the Tigers earlier this week. But there are lessons to be learned about improving yourself.
Yes.
There. Yes. And Trevor Rogers should be a shining example that the Orioles can hold up to other players too and say, this is what you can do if you can understand that you're not a perfect prospect, you're never a perfect player, and there are going to be things that you need to work on, even if you've proved it before at this level.
Yeah.
He allowed 3 earned runs, some crazy stats from Trevor Rogers, in just one start. That was his second start this season. He allowed 2 earned runs in 3 starts of his 17. He made 6 starts in the month of August. He gave up exactly 1 run in each and every one of those starts. And amazingly, he was doing it without incredible strikeout stuff. It's not like he was striking out 11, 10 batters. He didn't strike out 10 batters once this season. He struck out 9 batters just once. When was the last time that you saw a pitcher in the Orioles organization on the big league team have this kind of stretch of dominance?
It's not been to this level. I mean, what Kyle Bradish did in 2024 was going back to like Mike Messina territory.
Yeah.
Um,
and I think of Corbin Burns last year too.
Yes, Corbin Burns was in that mix too, and just sustained. I'm going to say sustained, not greatness, but like really goodness.
Yeah.
Sustained, whatever that is. But this is just another level. And if there's always going to be the like, would this have happened over 30 starts question? I think that's a completely fair one. But the things that Trevor Rogers, there aren't things that he does badly necessarily, but like he's also given up 3 home runs this year.
That's nuts.
Yeah, I mean, he has a sub-1 whip and 3 home runs. There was I remember distinctly the night of the Cal celebration. We went to dinner with some friends around over Harbor East area, and we're walking to Fells, and I had seen that like Trevor Rogers had already given up 1 run, and it was like the 4th or 5th inning, and there were 2 on and 1 out, and I walked past the TV and I saw that, and I was telling my wife, I was like, this would be weird if he gave up like more than like he's already given up his run for today.
Yeah.
What's going to happen here? And I believe he got out of it. You don't see that very often, and I think we made a joke about it when Kyle was on in the spring or earlier in the season about like, wouldn't it be hilarious to extend him? Like, I don't know what that would look like, but like, I would bet on this. I don't think that somebody who's been in the places like baseball wise and like mentally, as Danielle pointed out, would be somebody who wants to like go back to that point. And that feels like someone who is worth betting on if you're the Orioles.
Yeah, I mean, he is going now into his walk year in 2026.
And because he was between his All-Star season and this year was alternated between being like fine and bad for 2 + 3 years. Like he only made like $2.6 million this year. Even if you give him a massive raise from that level in arbitration for a 3rd-year player is still going to be like $5 or $6, maybe $7 million tops.
Yeah.
If Trevor Rogers has any anxiety about this continuing and wants to make more money earlier, the Orioles can double plus his next year's salary as part of a deal to ensure he stays here longer. And maybe you give it a term that it's 3 or 4 years at a pretty chunky number, and he can go back into free agency. And if after that, like I'm personally incredibly interested in that. And I think if we're sitting here having a conversation about a Trevor Rogers extension at any point in the next like 6 months, it's going to be because he will be incredibly underpaid for the pitcher that he is next year based on how arbitration works.
Yeah, there's so much to like about him going forward. I mean, he turns 28 in November, so he is still on the right side of 30.
Yeah.
He does have a lot of big league innings under his belt, but there's really not much reason to believe that this kind of success won't be sustainable. Now, I don't think he's going to have a 1.35 ERA the rest of his big league career, but he has shown a lot of – this isn't a 10 start stretch. This is a 17 start stretch that he has put this kind of work in. I think a pessimist would look at this and say Trevor Rogers wasted his career year in a year where the Orioles didn't make the playoffs. Fine. The optimist would say this is something that he can repeat to some level. If you can get 80% of this next year, you have a potential second ace to throw next to Kyle Bradish next year. You at least have somebody who's going to be the top end of your rotation next year. He's a lefty. The Orioles don't have too many of those. So there's just so much to like about Trevor Rogers. And it's funny when we look back at the conversations that we had in the offseason, conversations that we had even earlier this season about the trades that the Orioles made at the deadline last year, where they send out 3 prospects and they get Zach Eflin back from the Tampa Bay Rays. And that looked like a home run. And the Orioles were trying to, I don't know if they were trying to, but some fans were calling for the Orioles to extend Zach Eflin. Yeah. He had a good playoff start, but Trevor Rogers was, a complete miss. He was a wash. You gave up Kyle Stowers, who was an all-star, and you gave up Connor Norby, and you got nothing back. Well, now that trade looks a lot better than the Zach Eflin one. And I don't want to say that the Orioles didn't appreciate what they got from Zach Eflin, but suffered a lot of injuries in his 1.5 years in Baltimore. It's part of the reason that Tampa Bay was okay with trading him at the time that they did. And at this point, Trevor Rogers is going to be here next year. We can't say the same for Zach Eflin. So just fascinating how that the conversation around the 2024 trade deadline has changed over the last 12 months.
Yeah. And to me, that speaks to something that I've kind of tried to wrestle with for a while. And I don't think there's a good way to say it. So I'm just going to off the cuff say it on a podcast as kind of an end point that I don't need to make at all. I think that's a good way to launch ideas. But like, it's challenging to think about like when you're talking about Trevor Rogers' wasted year in this circumstance. It's like, it makes the idea that I think we think about a lot more than probably like the Orioles and baseball decision makers do about like timelines and things aligning. It makes it like kind of feel not dumb, but like it just kind of seems like it's a really challenging thing to like actually execute. Like there's no predicting when Trevor Rogers gets right. When you trade for him, you just hope that he does, and you hope that it's in a situation that the team can benefit from. And there's no, Tony Mansolino was talking about like the ups and downs of young players. Like guys have bad years when they're early in their career. Sometimes that's who they end up being, and sometimes they just go back to being the good player that they were. And like, it's hard to align all these things. And I think one of the things that we've talked about a lot on this podcast is that once the homegrown pitching fire hose like turns on, this is going to be a completely different proposition than it was 3 and 4 years ago when it was all these hitters and those timelines don't align. But like, maybe that's not the point, but maybe it doesn't matter because there's a lot of different ways to win, and all you want to do is put yourself in a position for good things to happen as much as possible. They had to trade for Trevor Rogers to be the MVO. And like, it didn't help them last year and it didn't really matter this year, but you have to put yourself in a position for these good things to happen. And then if as many good things happen as possible, the timeline doesn't matter because there's a lot of good things happening and that means something good's happening.
Yeah. The MLB is by far the hardest league to predict.
Yeah.
And I think nothing is a better example of that than when teams go all in the offseason and then have to trade those guys 4 months later at the trade deadline.
Yeah.
How many times do we see that? I think the Mets are like the best example from a few years ago where they get Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer, and then these guys are out the door. Like that is it. You cannot predict it. And over the course of a season, so much randomness, so much injury luck can happen and can affect your team that nobody can predict timelines to any extent. Yeah. So the fact that the Orioles got this year out of Trevor Rogers means the trade was worth it, whether it happened during a good season or not.
Yeah.
How about the fact that, speaking of MVO voting, that Tony Mansolino, interim manager, got a vote? Did you know that you could vote for the manager?
I did not, because you can't. It says vote for a player.
That's what I thought.
It says vote for a player.
I don't understand why that vote was accepted, but Tony Mansolino, interim manager, got a vote for MVO.
Yeah. I mean,
okay. So did Dylan Carlson, by the way. And this is not you vote for one guy. You rank your top three. But Dylan Carlson was in somebody's top three. That means that Dylan Carlson got a vote over potentially Trevor Rogers, Gunnar Henderson, Jackson Holliday, Dean Kramer, Jordan Westberg, even Dylan Beavers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that I don't think he got a vote over any of the two people who
I would hope not
would be the top two candidates.
Hopefully somebody didn't put him over.
Rogers and Gunnar Henderson.
Yeah. We also don't know what vote it was. It could have been a first place vote.
Yeah. Yeah, that's unknowable.
Do you think it's a troll job?
I do not.
Dylan Carlson is negative 0.9 WAR, by the way.
I don't know who did it. I don't think it was a troll. I'm actually going to say I definitely don't care that much. I've already talked about it more than I would want to.
Okay,
not just
Not
just in this venue, but just being at the ballpark yesterday, and I'm fascinated to know why. But as I am, preparing to make an awards vote this fall and registering for my Hall of Fame ballot, I'm like, thank God there's some accountability for me there. Not to say that I'm going to make a bad choice, but You know, I'm personally not volunteering to be the organizer of a transparent MVO vote, but if there is one next year, no one will wonder why.
Yeah, I am of two minds. One, I on one side I do want to know what the thinking was, but on the other side, if you voted for him, I'm not sure I want to hear your opinion on the Orioles.
Yeah. It wasn't me. I'll say that.
It wasn't John. All right.
I like Dylan Carlson though.
No, nothing against him personally.
I feel bad that it's him, but like also like
I hate to bash the guy, and I'm not bashing the guy. I'm more bashing the person. But if you are that person, you're listening to this podcast, you have an open invitation to join us here at this seat.
I'm not gonna make any demographic claims about our listenership, but I don't know if the person who did it.
We have
podcast listener.
We do know that some people who are on the beat do listen to the podcast though as well.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about Tony Mansolino, because the Orioles' first decision of the offseason, could be hiring a GM. Maybe their 1.5 decision, their second decision, one of their first big decisions of the offseason, let's say that, is hiring a manager. Tony Mansolino took over as interim manager when Brandon Hyde was fired on Preakness Day, lest we forget, on May 17th. Tony Mansolino was the Orioles' third base coach under Brandon Hyde. Brandon Hyde is sent out the door along with Tim Cousins, his bench coach, his best friend, essentially a man who wore many hats. Tony Mansolino was thrown into an incredibly difficult spot at the time. The only previous managerial experience he had anywhere close to the big leagues was in AAA. The team at the time was 15-28. They were going through a number of injuries. They were desperate to try to get back into the playoff race. They had so many underperformers. He takes over the job for a Saturday day game, and then Kyle Gibson takes the hill and gets absolutely shelled.
Their brains bashed in for 2 days.
Yeah, that may have been Gibson's last start as an Oriole. It was at least his penultimate one.
Yeah, I just remember like once I wrote, I like stood up and like started walking. I'm sure you wanted to do a podcast and I was just running away. I just needed to like take a moment, and like in the time it took me to walk around the concourse, he gave up like 3 home runs.
Yes.
It was incredible.
I remember I think I had to go back to Preakness, and I remember like being in the parking lot. No, what I had to do was I went outside to shoot a TikTok video.
Right.
Because you can see all of our great TikTok videos on at Bolt Banner Sports or at All Banner Sports. Follow us on social media. And I remember hearing the crowd and the reaction to giving up like 4 first inning runs. I don't think he made it out of the first inning, Kyle Gibson. I think he only got 2 outs in that first inning.
Yeah.
Anyway, that team was in dire straits when Tony Mansolino took over. He didn't even talk for the first time as interim manager publicly until after that game, when he said, "I didn't want this. Nobody wanted this to happen. Very much appreciate the job Brandon Hyde did. We're going to try to make the playoffs."
Yeah.
Very difficult spot. In the time since then, and with last night's win, the Orioles are 59-55. They have gotten a little bit luckier health-wise. They have gotten some key guys back. They have also subtracted some pieces, like they did at the trade deadline, like the aforementioned 9 players that were sent out the door. They've gotten an infusion of exciting youth, Samuel Basayo and Dylan Beavers being 2 of those. But they also have still seen some underperformance. And yet, despite all of this, all of the bumps in the road, they have a winning record under Tony Mansolino. And I think Mansolino, when he enters into what we assume will be a job interview to be the permanent full-time manager of the Baltimore Orioles in a few weeks, will have a strong case to make to maintain this job.
Yeah.
John, what do you think of the job that Tony Mansolino has done? And do you think he has a strong case to have that interim tag ripped off?
Yes. I'm still processing what I think the answer to like whether you should have it or not is. But I was thinking that like, and you are, you are the podcast pro, and this is a good. I think we start with just like, why would he keep the job? And then we can say why he wouldn't. And we can figure out which argument that we make in this moment is the best. He would keep the job. I guess I should answer your question. He's done a good job. He's done a really good job. I think when we think back to April, May, as this was as this was plummeting down the mountainside, and destroying everything in its path, there was a lot of stuff you could say about the offseason and how the rotation was built and those gosh darn platoons and why isn't so-and-so playing and Jorge Mateo in center field. Sure, whatever.
Yeah.
This team was also playing terrible, terrible baseball. They were throwing the ball around. They weren't catching the ball. They weren't hitting the right cutoff man. They weren't throwing to the right base. They weren't hitting. They weren't pitching. They were playing brutal, brutal baseball. And I know that's something I latched onto because I'm not going to get into how I had to cover this team and write about it over those 2 months. It was really hard to figure out the right thing to do. But that was undeniable. And we could talk about what Mike Elias and his group did. We could talk about why all these pitchers were hurt all of a sudden. We could talk about why Charlie Morton was giving up 1 million runs every game. But Brandon Hyde's department and the coach's department was to make them not play badly on the field every night. And that was not happening. That changed. It took a while for it to change. They kind of stayed bad for a week and a half after Tony Mansolino.
And they've had some really bad stretches.
But I think that the bad stretches, as we get here and now, are these. The Norfolk Tides were not a juggernaut AAA team this year, and most of the players who are on the Baltimore Orioles right now spend a lot of time playing for the Norfolk Tides this year. So maybe we're not judging on that. So Tony Mansolino made this team better. I think he has, just by virtue of being a different voice, he has been a welcome changed voice. Brandon Hyde was a manager of this team for a long time. He was a manager of this team for when they were bad, when they were good, and then they got bad again. And I think there was a consistency that everyone appreciated from when they went from bad to good. And I'm not sure the dials were appropriately, turned to get the pitch right when they got bad again. That would with Brandon Hyde's
right
style, it wasn't working. You can tell it was clearly not working. Tony Mansolino, it has been working. And I think that matters. He's done a good job for what was a very difficult job.
What do you think? And I want to preface this by saying we've had this conversation before on this podcast. We are not in the clubhouse every minute of every day. We get some select clubhouse time to talk to players, to see what the atmosphere is like. We get time to talk to the manager. We are not in that clubhouse every day. We are at no matter what, we will always be at an information deficit. And there is always stuff that goes on that we don't know about. And sometimes we find out about it after the fact, like we found out about Brandon Hyde calling out members of the team and saying we need to play harder. We found that out after he was fired, and that was through good reporting by Andy Kuska. But given the information that talking to players, talking to Tony Mansolino, talking to everybody in the warehouse, what is the difference between Brandon Hyde, the manager, and Tony Mansolino, the manager?
It's hard to say. I think in India around the 100-game mark when Tony Mansolino reached that, he did a story and talked to some players about, the rapport he's building in the clubhouse and how he's kind of broadening his reach and being around for guys. I think it's also, having been a coach as recently as 5 months ago, he's much more locked in that life, and you're a little more hands-on when you're a coach. Brandon Hyde was the manager of this team for 6+ years, and you don't get less managery stuff to do as time goes on. I remember after the first year Brandon Hyde was manager, we were talking for some story in the offseason, and he had mentioned that he wanted to move around his media time because he didn't feel like he could be on the field as much as he wanted to be. He was doing manager stuff while we were in a clubhouse, and he'd come talk to us, or he'd do the radio, he'd come talk to us, and he'd get on the field, and there's already a group of BP that's done, and he didn't like that. He wanted to be out there with with getting a feel for it, walking around, doing all the stuff that the manager does. There's a lot of pulls on your time, and I think Tony Mansolino did a really good job of keeping his focus on all that stuff that happens before the game and being around and understanding how hard it is to work really hard before the game and then work really hard during a game. And like sometimes it's not going to work out. And I think there was a real results focus as this season started, because why would you not focus on the results?
Right.
Why would you not focus on the fact that this team is going in the tank? And the way that felt, I think we could see moments watching Brandon Hyde talk after games, before games, like there was clearly frustration and there was clearly warranted frustration. Let's make it very clear that there was warranted frustration, and there was an acknowledgement that there needed to be a lot of things better happening that there were. And I don't know the extent to which it was felt that the efforts to improve things were understood. If I'm Gunnar Henderson and I am trying to get my swing right and trying to play a really good shortstop, having missed spring training and all this stuff, and like I'm just using him as an example of somebody who I know takes ground balls every single day, even if he doesn't want to. They're still out there taking ground balls like this homestand. And somebody mentioned, like, if you can't turn a double play now, when are you going to be able to turn one? We've been doing this for like 6 months. Like, they're still out there doing it though. They work every single day on this stuff. And like when you are doing that and you don't feel like that is recognized, you're not going to be super happy about that.
Yeah.
And when you feel like it's your fault anyways, and which these guys clearly do, you are going to wonder if that's being recognized. And I think that Tony Mansolino, he's still out there doing as much pregame work and hitting those fungos as he can, because he wants to be a part of that, and that is who he is. And Brandon Hyde also likes to do that type of stuff. That is who he is. These are coaches. These are guys who came up doing this. And I think it was a lot harder for Brandon Hyde to be the manager of this team this year than Tony Mansolino, for a variety of reasons.
You've also had conversations with him, a lot of conversations with him over the last few months. What kind of, for fans who are watching the pre and post game show and see his comments, or for fans who watch him in the dugout but don't really get an idea of what he's like when the cameras are off, what is he like when the cameras are off?
Yeah, there are people who are around him more than me. He feels very like, he's frank, he's honest, he's refreshing. And I think I've gained an appreciation for his perspective and understanding on like what is going on. Like, a lot of stuff has happened to make it so that this Orioles season is ending on Sunday and everyone's flying home from New York and nobody will think about this disaster ever again. A lot of things have gone into that. I think I have grown to appreciate, how he has talked about how that's happened. It doesn't sound like I know what it sounds like to equivocate. I do it all the time. It's pretty much my deal. He does not sound like he is like fence sitting when he says things like, we have players whose swings are out of whack right now. We have players who are trying to figure out who they are, and like giving reasons for why things have gone badly offensively for some players, and also saying like, but that's completely natural and it's like to be expected and it's okay. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. Like, all those things can be true. And I think the way that he communicates and presents it makes me feel like he understands it and believes it. And I think that is an important thing for that job.
Sure. Well, that's a pretty strong case to be made for. Yes.
No. And let me make, like, I think the broad case for him staying. And
yes, please do.
Yeah. Sorry. I've just been talking for.
No. I think this is important for fans to get an idea of what he's like, because they've only had a short amount of time with him at the helm. And quite frankly, I think, as we'll get into in the offseason, I think a lot of fans have tuned out this team once they started going down the toilet. Yeah. I think a lot of fans tuned them out. Some fans tuned them out back in May. Some fans tuned them out in July when the trade deadline was made, or when the trade deadline happened. But I think it's important for fans that may be trying to, get back into the offseason and get themselves ready for this managerial search, understanding the candidate here that is Tony Mansolino. So what is the case here?
Yeah, so the case would be, and I wrote, a column that hasn't, for the live listeners, isn't available on thebanner.com yet.
Where people can subscribe?
For $1 for 6 months.
That's correct.
Which one? I always do wrong.
Not $6 for 1 month. $1 for 6 months.
$6 for 1 month, probably good too.
Which is what they pay us too. Weird, like $1 for 6 months.
Yeah.
Kidding?
Yeah.
I'm very happy with my salary.
Nice sweatshirt, Paul.
Thank you. I'm a company man. If people are watching
Baltimore banner sweatshirt, that sounds nice.
X, Facebook, and YouTube. Yeah, John still doesn't have one.
We've gone off the rails. There is going to be a camp, and we're talking about when Brandon Hyde, got fired. I'm sure there was every single coach in that room was like, "This is going to be fun. I'm going to look for a job in October." I'm not sure that's going to be the case now. I think there's some choices on the staff, but to keep coaches in place, to keep Tony Mansolino in place, is to acknowledge that there's going to be some value to continuity. And if you believe that there is that how to get your arms around why some of these hitters got so out of whack, why these approaches are so inconsistent, why it's been so hard for young players to get a foothold on this team. If you think you have an understanding of that and you think that the personnel are in place to fix that, changing means there's going to be a period of adjustment. If the Orioles clean house and Tony Mansolino is not the manager and all the hitting coaches go away and there's some new faces and some guys you've seen from the minors and some guys, there's a whole new staff, we're going to spend a lot of time hearing about how everyone's getting to know each other and they're learning the players and they're learning how they work and how to trust them and how to push them. And that might be really good long-term, but that's not going to be how the Orioles go from being a team that loses high 80s games this year to a team that makes playoffs next year. These are coaches and people around this team that know intimately what is wrong with every single one of these players. Nobody knows it more than them, and probably have spent a lot of time thinking about how to fix it and knows how they have a better idea than most how to go about it. If you are, there's a new manager will go fly around California and the South and Oregon and meet all these people for the first time in December or November or January or whatever. And cool. What will happen in the interim? Like, how will the Orioles get better in the interim? So I think if you are going to make a case to keep them, it's that, Michael Elias is sitting in his office being like, I'm going to spend a bunch of money and we're going to have a killer pitching staff and rebuild the bullpen. And I'm going to get a grown man to hit fourth in this lineup and tell all these guys that the days of being pouty and sad that you're not good and everyone's upset with you are over. Let's just go be good. If he's going to do that, then it doesn't really, let's say it doesn't matter who the manager is, but then keeping a lot of things consistent in that world of change would be helpful. That is one of the primary reasons why, if the Orioles decide to keep Tony Mansolino, they would. Is that a compelling reason to? I'm not really sure, but I think that continuity matters, and I think it matters.
Yeah, and I think the parallel that you could draw here is to Brandon Hyde, who oversaw the team during the rebuild, saw a lot of the Orioles' good young players come up and make their big league debuts, and there are times often during these massive overhaul rebuilds where you got the manager that takes you through the lean years in Houston. You had Bo Porter before you hired AJ Hinch. You have, I can't remember who the manager was before Joe Madden in Chicago.
I do. I can't remember his name. I'm going to interrupt you as you're talking.
Yeah, no, but if you think of it,
Rick Renteria.
I think that's who it was. Yeah. You have the manager that gets you through the lean years, then you hire the manager that you want to take you over the top. The Orioles stuck with Brandon Hyde because they were on a continuous trend up, and because a lot of the reasons that you just said, John. He knew those players intimately. He knew what they needed to work on. He knew what made them tick. And the continuity, I think, was a big reason why they were able to get over the hump and get back to the playoffs in 2023. And so, yes, they were immensely talented at that point, but I do think Brandon Hyde was the right guy at that moment to lead the team. I think you could make a similar case for Tony Mansolino here. The downside is you see this happen across baseball all the time, and the Orioles did this in 2007. They removed the interim tag from Dave Tremblay at the time. This was the time period where they fire their manager halfway through the year, and Sam Perlazzo. That team was 29-40. Dave Tremblay takes over the team for the next 54 games and does very well. They go 29-25. They don't even need to start interviewing candidates during the offseason. They remove the interim tag from Dave Tremblay. What happens later that night, John? The Orioles lose 30-3 to the Texas Rangers, the beginning of a 9-game losing streak. And it's not long before he is fired 3 years later, I should say. And when Dave Tremblay is fired and replaced by Juan Samuel, who is replaced by Buck Showalter.
Heard of him.
So there are downsides to this. This doesn't always work when you just remove an interim tag. And I think the Orioles were never going to, while Mike Elias committed to having this coaching staff in place through the end of the year, I didn't see it as very likely that they were ever going to take off the interim tag at any point during the regular season.
Yeah. And let's talk about why this week with Tony Mansolino's could be Tony Mansolino's last week. I think that's part of it. It's that, there are people who were interim managers and are no longer, who are doing a pretty good job around the game. I think John Schneider in Toronto was an interim manager. And I would also point out that they lost 88 games last year, and
everybody wanted him fired.
They had hired an assistant hitting coach and assistant bullpen coach, but left most of their staff intact, and now they are going to probably win the division. But in Philly they have somebody who was an interim manager. It's not unheard of. It is also not. It's not something where there's been a clear improvement over what was going on. I'm not sure the level of improvement, record wise and quality wise, and we can go from just the regular 4 games over 500 since he got hired, because they started poorly those first few weeks. Since the Trevor Rogers game, it's much better than that. But I would say there would be the part where you would say, thank you for stabilizing this. Now it's time to change things and go to the next level. And I think that would be the opportunity the Orioles would want to take. If you kept Tony Mansolino in that job, you are basically locking in. You're not going to fire him next year. You can't. That's not really fair. That would be a bad look to pretty much everybody. And that's not to say that that drives any decision making where it comes to the Baltimore Orioles, but it would bring way unnecessary scrutiny on the front office and ownership if they fired a second manager after making him the permanent one, and then had to reverse that quickly. It is almost safer to not keep him and get somebody who has experience, or get somebody who is on those managerial hot lists that we're going to start reading in a week about who are the top candidates.
I got some names already here, John.
Let's hear them.
I'll throw out some names. Ryan Flaherty.
Flash.
I think that's, if it's not Tony Mansolino, he's probably the odds-on favorite to be the Orioles manager next year, at least from the outside. Currently the Cubs bench coach, obviously an Orioles legend. Maybe Brian Snitker is out in Atlanta if he chooses to move on. It sounds like it's his job if he wants it, based on national reporting. I think Buster Olney reported that. He's soon to be 70 years old. Another veteran manager, another World Series winner, Bruce Bochy. Might be time to move on from him in Texas if the Orioles want to go get the baseball man who's won before, who's done it before. Those are 2 good candidates. Skip Schumacher, who's currently the senior advisor to Chris Young in Texas, somebody who has previous managerial experience with the Miami Marlins, and then former Cubs manager David Ross. The Orioles pulling from the Cubs system again would be very funny, because they've already done it with Brandon Hyde. But those are some names. Yeah, those are some names.
And, Ryan Flaherty, we know that he knows Tony Mansolino well. I believe they played together, if not close to each other, from the Vanderbilt.
Sure.
And David Ross, very close to Brandon Hyde from their times there. I'm sure they've all talked about being the Orioles manager and working for the Baltimore Orioles. And if you want to know anything about what I'm talking about, just listen to last week's podcast if you didn't, and just come to the the top down nature of things here. Those will be interesting, but to bring in somebody who's there's a ton of people who have successful managerial resumes who would have a big name and would probably pretty reasonably make an impact here. And that would just come with a lot of, not demands, but that would just change a lot of how things happen around here. And I think there's probably a world where the Orioles sit here and say, maybe we do need to change how things happen around here. There's also, because basically just of how they've operated for like the whole entire time this front office has been in place, they don't necessarily think that. But I think the case would be that you can have, there is a demonstrable impact, and it would be helpful if I did research and prepped, and maybe we will do this. But time and time again, when a team goes from, when a team brings in like an experienced, been there, done that, won that manager, there is almost always an impact.
Yeah.
It is almost always drastic. And if you want to ensure that the Orioles are going to be in the playoff mix this time next year instead of packing up the clubhouse, that is one of the surest ways to do that. You have to get it right. You have to get the person right for working here. You have to get somebody who can work within the confines of the Orioles organization, which is to say that you're going to have a hitting department that operates, not independently of you, but on its own, and pitching department that operates the way that it operates, and you are involved in everything, but you are not running the show. And like, that's hard for people, period.
Yeah.
But that is the demonstrable way to make an impact if they get that right. And I think that would be the main reason why Tony Mansolino doesn't, because you can try to keep things on this upward trajectory, or you can try to accelerate it by doing something different and just changing the formula.
I think, though, bringing in the guy who's done it before, been there, done it before, it often leads to success, but it doesn't always.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of, Ron Washington, who is currently on medical leave, I believe. And
yeah.
You hope for the best. Somebody who is a legendary figure in the game of baseball, who has been there and done it before, has taken teams to the World Series, didn't exactly have that kind of success with the Angels. Another guy who has won a World Series that has already gotten a mention on this podcast, Joe Madden, had the same struggles with the Angels.
Yeah.
Sometimes there was organizational failure.
Yeah, sometimes it's the Angels.
Sometimes it's just the Angels.
Yeah, but did Joe Girardi go to a World Series with the Phillies? Or
no? Joe Girardi was the Yankees manager, won the World Series.
Yeah.
They hire him. He's a failure in Philly.
Yeah.
I don't think he even lasted 2 years. They bring in the interim manager in Rob Thompson. He takes them to the World Series.
Yeah.
So the guy who's been there, done that, doesn't always find immediate success. Bruce Bochy, another guy who's gotten a mention on this podcast, been there, done that 3 times with the Giants, goes to the Rangers, wins a World Series pretty immediately. Yeah. And then you've got guys like Craig Counsell, who was poached by the Cubs from their division rival, who Cubs have been great this year, didn't start off great. They shell out all this money to get him in the building, and with the first year, it looks like a failure. So I think 3 main questions the Orioles have to ask themselves, and these are 3 questions that we don't know the answer to. When it comes to Tony Mansolino, 1, has the turnaround been good enough? Has the success been good enough? Or is this just a case of, well, the Orioles got healthier, they stabilized themselves? You were saying it at the time, John, when the Orioles fired Brandon Hyde, that all of the things that could go wrong, it was Murphy's Law, all of the things that could go wrong were going wrong in the first half. And I guarantee Gunnar Henderson will be hitting better by the end of the year. You'll get healthier. Things will stabilize by themselves, and it will have nothing to do with the manager. So 1, is that good enough? 2, how much of that turnaround, that winning record under Tony Mansolino, is his doing, and how much is just the players being better and them getting luckier? And 3, if you throw Tony Mansolino into a pool of all of the candidates, which is what they will do in about a week, where would you rank Tony Mansolino? So those are 3 important questions that I think the Orioles have to ask themselves when considering the possibility of keeping him. To me, if I'm running this front office, and I'm not, for good reason, because I wouldn't know what the hell I was doing,
You didn't get your GM interview yet?
Not yet.
Oh, they said they were going to call you.
I know. I'm waiting, Mike.
Mine went okay.
It was just a Zoom one. I don't think they brought you in person, did they?
I've already said too much.
If I were running this front office, I would have an exhaustive search. I would talk to as many different people as possible. And I threw out all those names. There are definitely names out here that are on the Orioles board that we don't know about that they're trying to talk to and will arrange interviews with.
Yeah.
I would try to talk to as many different people as possible. And I would give Tony Mansolino as fair a shot as anyone. And if he's the guy at the end of that search that you want to make your manager, great. But don't just say, well, the Orioles we have a winning record under Tony Mansolino. A lot of the players seem to like him. Seems like he's made some improvements. Let's just rip that tag off and keep him. You have to go through your process, put in the due diligence necessary here. And if he's the guy at the end of that, then he's the guy.
Yeah. There's so I think all those questions are exactly right and like the priority. And I think one as you're talking about it, I'm not sure a lengthy process that ends with Tony Mansolino is going to feel right.
Right.
I think
that's a
Michael
good way to
Elias
put
sits
that.
down at Camden Yards and in the press conference room at noon on Monday and says, this guy is our manager or this guy is not going to be our manager. I think that if they go on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I know he's not going to do either of those things. But if this is like a super lengthy process that leads them to Tony Mansolino, I will have a lot of questions about the process. And that doesn't have anything to do with whether he should be the person who does it or not. That's, it's like the Cowboys, like going through their like song and dance and then like hiring
Brian Schottenheimer.
And it's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
What was everybody doing this whole time? That would not inspire confidence in the process, even if it would be an outcome that would be okay. As I just wanted to say that because that would be gosh, here we go. That would be like the weirdest outcome. And like, I'm also not, as I'm thinking about saying that, I'm not ruling out any weird outcomes in this process because it's already started pretty weird.
I think we're also going to be diving deeper in a few days' time and maybe a week's time after we hear from Michael Elias and Tony Mansolino into the pool of candidates. We can really run through them. Those are just some names that you're going to start hearing a lot over the coming weeks. But I think it's the same thing with like how we started the podcast by talking about how baseball games are hard to predict. Seasons are hard to predict. I think one of the most difficult things to know is who is going to be a good coach, who is going to be a good manager at any level of sports.
Yeah.
Sometimes they look like home run hires and they end up being complete busts. So it doesn't guarantee success. Winning the press conference, winning the headlines does not guarantee success. So if they go out and get Bruce Bochy at the end of this process, that'll certainly win some headlines. You're going to lead SportsCenter maybe, although I don't know if they care about baseball anymore. Yeah. You're going to get a lot of press and publicity for that. That doesn't mean that you're going to win any games. So you have to put in the due diligence and understand that it's not about what looks good. It's about what is good.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about the 7-hour podcast we're going to do next Tuesday to unpack all this stuff.
Yeah, sorry. We've already gone 7 hours today.
No, but I would just wrap up to say this is probably the one area where having observed how the Orioles do things over the Michael Elias era does not really help. They've hired one manager. It was a very long manager search. It ended hilariously as everyone who's sitting in the hotel suite, as Mike said, they didn't hire a manager, as the television said, that Brandon Hyde was chosen to be the Orioles manager. Just a great time. I'll never stop talking about it or thinking about it. But they also, if they're looking for, front office people, they're probably going to go with somebody they knew in Houston. If they're trying to identify hitters in the draft, they're going to identify XY, looking for pitchers. They love, these traits, that traits. There's so much pattern recognition you can do, and there's not that much there's none on the manager side. They were hiring player development managers, and they did a really good job of doing that. And now it's just, they're searching for something completely different. We can't even possibly know what it is.
No. Let's just, like you said, hope that it's not December 10th or whenever it was 6 years ago.
That would also be an incredible failure.
7 years ago. Yeah.
That would be an incredible failure.
Let's not take that long. That was mostly due to the fact that Michael Elias was not hired until November.
Yeah, he
And
was
then
hired like Thanksgiving week.
The Orioles have a 2-month head start that they didn't have last time. All right, let's do our minor league check-in. Let's
one-liners about all these guys, right?
Yeah, really. Let's run through some of the Orioles that are in the Arizona Fall League, because this is kind of an interesting league for players to be put into. A lot of different reasons for them to get some Arizona Fall League time. I think one is players who miss time with injury over the course of the season. It's just giving them at-bats, giving them innings. Two, I think for players that struggled a little bit, underperformed, trying to get them more opportunities to get right. I think another reason is to just continue the work that a lot of these players are doing, just to reinforce the kind of base that they have. The Orioles have some big names on their Arizona Fall League team. Starts with Enrique Bradfield Jr.
Yep.
Obviously, one of the Orioles' top prospects who's missed a lot of time with injury this year, and so he fits into the first bucket of being somebody that the Orioles probably just want to keep playing because he only played in 70 games for 76 games, I should say, between AA and AAA. Did finish the season with Norfolk. Luis De Leon is another big name, 22-year-old lefty, finished the season with AA Chesapeake. 2024 second rounder Ethan Anderson, catcher, first baseman, somebody who is a little bit of a light hitter, sub 700 OPS, but he's a catcher. So the Orioles like his defense there, finished the season with AA Chesapeake. And then a string of pitchers here: Carson Dorsey, Andy Fabian, Zach Fruit, and Tanner Smith, and outfielder Thomas Sosa. John, who on this list? Obviously, Bradfield is going to be the headline grabber here, and games don't start for 2 weeks. The first game is October 6th.
Sounds right.
Who on this list are you really intrigued by?
Bradfield's the obvious one. I think that it's going to be really important that he gets as many reps as possible. I think because he was hurt as often and for as long as he was, the fact that he had a pretty good AA season is kind of lost in this. It's not going to be like gaudy, hitting like 20-some home runs at AA. Like
he was hamstring strains, right?
Yes.
It was like first his right, then his left.
Yes.
It was like the Adley Rutschman obliques.
Yes. You just do them both. Get it all out of the way at once. He's going to be somebody that is going to make an impact out there. People are going to notice that. It's going to be, I think there's a couple of reasons to send somebody to AFL. Get extra work, like you mentioned. Continue the progress they were making. I think Ethan Anderson goes in that category. Somebody who was really picked it up as the season went on, and somebody who you can look at and be like, yeah, switch hitting catcher, like do a lot of things. Just go catch some more, go hit some more, and then there's also like a trade showcase aspect of people going out there, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see people see Enrique Bradfield Jr. and do that over the course of like 3-4 weeks out there. There's just going to be a lot of people who appreciate it. There's going to be a lot of Enrique Bradfield buzz just by how he plays the game and goes about his day-to-day out there. Excited for Luis De Leon. I think he's somebody, I don't know if we talked about him on here, but he's somebody as the season has gone on, he kind of focused his fastball command and really started dominating at Aberdeen. He's just has really good stuff. It's like, it's 3 really good pitches from the left side. The command's not always there, but he's a young pitcher, and that's how it works. He's probably in that second tier below the Michael Ferret, Trey Gibson, Nestor Herman category. Braxton Bragg, I suppose, was in that before he got hurt, but Luis De Leon pretty comfortably in that next tier. I really like Tomas Sosa. He just mashes. Another guy that could make an impact. Like, just at some point you're gonna see a video of like a 450-foot home run from him in the AFL. That's gonna go like viral to the extent the AFL highlights go viral, and that'll be cool. And I also really like Zach Fruit. He's somebody who missed a lot of time this year with injury. I think he had like a lat deal. Didn't come back his best when he got back, but by the end of the season at Chesapeake, he was pitching really well, and he has big stuff. And I think it's going to be really important for him to get as much work as possible, because this could be one of those platform years next year where he's like AA to the big leagues if it clicks.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will have more updates from that when the games start being played. I think of the most viral highlight I can think of is when Heston Kjerstad was in Arizona Fall League and just absolutely hit the cover off the ball.
Yeah.
That was about it. Creed Willems, he hit some tanks, I think, in Arizona Fall League, didn't he?
Probably, yeah.
Probably.
People loved Creed there last year. Creed's great.
Creed is great.
And like Jake Cunningham also hit some long home runs there too, and he spent this year all at Aberdeen.
All right. Well, we will have noted.
I said that.
We will have more updates for you on thebanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. Of course, get John's newsletter, Inside the Dugout. He's got a great story up now, maybe hitting your inboxes within the last 24 to 48 hours about a billboard that he saw driving around, an Orioles billboard. I won't give away the premise there. Danielle Allentuck, Andy Kuska, Kyle Goon have plenty more for you as well. Orioles season ends, but our podcast will not be over. We're going to have another update for you. I think we're going to have a 2-hour-long podcast next week to break down what we're going to hear from Mike Elias and Tony Mansolino at the end of the season. And then we will have plenty more coverage throughout the offseason, a very critical offseason for the Baltimore Orioles. At John Meoli is his handle. I'm at Paul Mancano and at Old Banner Sports. Thanks so much for tuning in.